Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Logan Walker had his hands covered in red dirt when the phone rang for the third time. He was crouched in the pasture, adjusting fence posts he'd installed himself over the past few weeks. The October sun beat down on his back, but he barely felt it. Working with his hands had always been his way of keeping his mind busy, away from thoughts that hurt too much to face. When he finally picked up the phone and saw Jennifer's name flashing on the screen, something twisted in his stomach. Jennifer never called. They barely knew each other beyond the university social events where Avery taught. Her voice was hesitant, almost a whisper, like she was somewhere she shouldn't be heard. "Logan, I'm so sorry to call like this, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you. It's about Avery. Something's been going on that everyone in the department has known for months, and you deserve to know. She's having an affair with Brandon Mitchells, the department head. It's not new. It's been going on for a while. I thought you knew, that maybe you two had some kind of arrangement, but when I saw you at last month's event, talking about fixing up the farm with that look in your eyes, I realized you had no idea. I'm so sorry, Logan. You don't deserve this." The world went strangely quiet after Jennifer hung up. Logan stayed crouched in the pasture, holding the phone like it was some strange object he'd just found. Around him, the mountains of North Carolina stretched out in shades of green and gold, indifferent to the implosion happening inside his chest. 2 years. 2 years rebuilding every inch of this inherited farm. 2 years building a home for him and Avery. 2 years planting literal and metaphorical roots while she, apparently, pulled up everything that kept them together. Logan stood up slowly, wiped his hands on his worn jeans, and looked around. The barn he'd built thinking of the horses Avery always dreamed of having. The apple orchard he'd planted because she said picking fruit was therapeutic. The wide porch with the swing where they planned to spend evenings reading together. Every piece of that place was a declaration of love. And now every piece seemed to mock him. He didn't think much. He just got in his pickup and started driving. 3 hours to the city. 3 hours to decide what he'd say, how he'd react, whether he could keep his composure. But when he pulled up in front of the apartment where Avery spent her weekdays, all the rehearsed words evaporated. Lights were on in the windows. It was almost 9 on a Saturday night. She should have been alone, grading papers like she always said she was. But through the thin curtains, Logan saw 2 silhouettes, 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. The spare key was on his keychain. Logan always carried it for emergencies. Ironic, he thought, that the biggest emergency in their marriage was him using that key to find the truth. He opened the door without a sound. The apartment was small, just a bedroom and an open living space with a kitchen. There was nowhere to hide. Soft music played on her Spotify, some jazz she loved. Muffled voices came from the bedroom. He walked toward the slightly open door like he was in a trance. Avery was in bed with Brandon Mitchells. No room for alternative interpretations, no convenient misunderstandings. She was in his arms, wearing only a thin t-shirt, hair messy, laughing at something he'd whispered. Brandon, the respected department head Logan had met at 2 campus events. Brandon, who proudly spoke of his wife and twin sons whenever anyone asked. Brandon, who now froze when he saw Logan standing in the doorway. Avery turned and her face went pale instantly. She yanked the sheet up like that gesture could undo what Logan had just seen. Brandon scrambled to get dressed, mumbling incoherent apologies that tangled into a pathetic noise. "Logan, listen, this isn't, I didn't mean to, it was a mistake, we weren't," the words tripped over each other, desperate to form some explanation that made sense. But there was no explanation. Only raw, brutal truth. Logan didn't yell. He didn't punch the wall, didn't break anything, didn't do any of the explosive things his body begged him to do. Instead, he simply looked at Avery. Really looked, as if seeing her for the first time, or maybe the last. She was curled up in bed, the sheet clutched to her chest, eyes wide with fear and shame. The woman he'd loved for 7 years, married to for 5, built a mountain home for with his own hands. "While I was building our house," Logan began, his voice startlingly calm and low, "you were tearing apart our marriage. While I was fixing up the barn thinking of the horses you wanted, you were here. While I was planting apple trees that won't bear fruit for years, you were harvesting lies every weekend." He pulled the apartment keys from his pocket and dropped them onto the bed between them. Each metallic clink of the keys hitting the mattress echoed in the tense silence. "Keep the keys. Keep him. Keep this version of you that I don't recognize." Brandon took the moment to flee, grabbing shoes and a shirt on the way out and practically running from the apartment. The door slammed behind him. Avery finally found her voice. "Logan, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. He manipulated me, I was confused, we were distant." The words tumbled out, desperate, but they sounded empty. Logan shook his head slowly. "We weren't distant, Avery. I was here. Always. You're the one who chose to be away. And that choice has consequences." He left, leaving the door open, as if even that final gesture of closing it wasn't worth the effort. In the hallway, his legs nearly gave out. He leaned against the wall, breathing deep, trying to process the complete collapse of everything he thought he knew about his life. But there was no time to fall apart. Not yet. He got to the pickup, got in, and drove the 3 hours back to the farm on autopilot, his mind completely empty. The next 3 months were an exercise in survival. Logan buried himself in work at the vet clinic, taking extra shifts, accepting complex surgeries he'd have turned down before. On the farm, he worked until physical exhaustion replaced emotional exhaustion. When the divorce papers arrived, Logan signed them without reading them twice. When Avery tried calling, he blocked her number. When she showed up at the clinic one afternoon, he told the receptionist to say he wasn't available, and never would be. He built walls so high around himself that not even light could get through. It was a gray October afternoon, with fine rain falling over the mountains, when Logan saw Mason's car pulling up the dirt road to the farm. He was on the barn roof, replacing shingles damaged by the last storm. Mason was his brother-in-law, but he'd also been a friend long before Logan ever met Avery. Seeing him park and step out with a serious expression told Logan immediately something was wrong. He climbed down the ladder slowly, grabbed 2 beers from the outdoor fridge, and waited. Mason didn't dance around. He never did. "Avery's pregnant," he said without preamble. 3.5 months. Brandon abandoned her when his wife found out. He went back to his marriage and threatened to sue Avery if she came near him. The university fired her. She's living with me and Rachel, broke, unemployed. She's destroyed, Logan. Completely destroyed. Mason paused, looking directly into his eyes. "And the baby could be yours. The dates line up with a weekend she spent here a month before you found out." Logan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He turned, staring at the mist-covered mountains, processing the information. Pregnant. Possibly his. Possibly the man who helped destroy their marriage. An innocent child in the middle of all that devastation. Mason went on, saying he wasn't asking for reconciliation, that he understood completely if Logan wanted distance, but that the child deserved to know the truth. Deserved to have a father, if that father was Logan. Part of Logan wanted to send Mason away and never hear another word about Avery or anything connected to her. But there was another part, the part that chose to become a vet because he couldn't stand to see innocent beings suffer, the part that couldn't ignore a child. A child who hadn't asked to be born into this mess. A child who, if he was the father, deserved to have a present dad. "All right," he said finally, voice rough. "I'll do the paternity test. But make it clear to her, this changes nothing between us. It never will. If he's mine, I'll take responsibility. But not for her. For the baby. The following weeks were the strangest of Logan's life. He attended prenatal appointments because his lawyer said it was important to establish presence early, in case the test confirmed paternity. But he stayed in the corner of the room, answering the obstetrician's questions in monosyllables, avoiding looking directly at Avery. She tried to talk, to bridge gaps, asking about the farm, about the animals at the clinic. Logan responded with icy politeness, never saying more than necessary. When she tried to apologize, he simply raised his hand in a stop gesture, making it clear he had no interest in hearing explanations or pleas for forgiveness. Logan watched her physical transformation at each appointment. Avery was unrecognizable. The confident, vibrant woman he'd known had been replaced by someone faded, shrunken. Hair uncut, just tied in a sloppy ponytail. Deep dark circles makeup couldn't hide anymore. Clothes too loose, as if she were trying to disappear into them. She'd lost weight everywhere except her growing belly. The doctor expressed concern about inadequate weight gain, signs of prenatal depression. Logan listened with a neutral expression, jotting down details his lawyer asked him to document, keeping emotional distance like armor. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Logan was in surgery, operating on a dog hit by a car, when his phone buzzed insistently in the pocket of his surgical gown. He ignored it. The surgery was delicate, every movement needed precision. The phone rang 2 more times before stopping. When he finally finished, saving the animal's life and carefully suturing, he washed his hands and checked his messages. 3 missed calls from Mason. 2 text messages in all caps. Avery in labor. St. Mary Hospital. Premature. Logan looked at the clock. 36 weeks. Premature but viable. He took off his gown, grabbed his pickup keys, and drove to the hospital with the same calm, methodical focus he applied to surgeries. There was no hurry that would change the fact that the baby was already being born. No emotion would make the situation less complicated. He simply needed to get there. The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and that artificial sweet perfume hospitals use to mask other odors. Mason was pacing nervously. Rachel, his wife, sat on one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. When they saw Logan, Rachel stood and gave him a quick hug. "She's okay," she said softly. "The baby too. It's born. It's a girl. Small but healthy. They're finishing up now. A girl." Logan felt something strange in his chest, something between panic and a tenderness he didn't know he still had. The nurse appeared at the door, looking around. "Mr. Walker?" He raised his hand automatically. "Want to come in and see the baby? Your wife, the baby's mother, is asking for you." Logan hesitated. Mason gave him an encouraging nod. "Go, man. At least see the child. You came this far." The room was small, lit by soft light. Avery lay in the hospital bed, visibly exhausted, hair stuck to her forehead with sweat. But in her arms, wrapped in pink and white striped blankets, was a tiny being. So small she looked too fragile to survive outside the womb. Logan stood at the door, unable to move. Avery looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked, voice hoarse. Logan walked to the bed like he was moving through syrup. When Avery placed the small, warm bundle in his arms, something inside Logan broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. The baby had closed eyes, tiny fists clenched near her face. She yawned, a tiny, perfect yawn, and those eyes opened briefly. Green. The exact shade as his. Her nose was definitely Avery's, as was the shape of her face. But those eyes were his. "The paternity test was already taken," Avery whispered. "Results in 48 hours. Logan just nodded, unable to take his eyes off the child in his arms. He didn't speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and words didn't matter anymore. He stood there for 10 minutes, just watching that face, now asleep again, utterly unaware of the complexity of the situation into which she'd been born. Finally, he gently returned the baby to Avery and left the room without saying a word. 48 hours later, Logan was alone on the farm when the envelope arrived via express mail. He held it for long minutes before opening it, sitting on the porch steps he'd built with his own hands 2 years ago. The envelope was white, official, with the lab's logo. Inside, a single sheet with numbers and technical terms that ended in one bolded line: probability of paternity, 99.7%. He is the biological father. Logan sat there as the October sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple. He sat there as shadows stretched and the air grew cold. He sat there and cried for the first time since discovering the betrayal 3 months ago. He cried for the marriage that died. He cried for the trust that would never return. He cried for the version of himself who believed in happy endings and eternal promises. And he cried for the daughter who had just inherited a family completely shattered before she even knew what a family was. On the first shared custody weekend, Logan arrived at Mason's house to pick up the baby. He'd bought a car seat, studied YouTube videos on how to install it properly, read 3 books on newborn care. The crib was assembled in the guest room of the farm. He'd bought diapers, clothes, bottles, everything the book said was necessary. He was technically prepared. Emotionally, it was another story. Avery was in the living room when he arrived, holding the baby against her chest, clearly terrified of the separation. "Logan," she began, voice trembling, "please, take good care of her. I know you're angry with me, and you have every right. I destroyed everything. But she's innocent. She didn't ask for any of this." Logan took the pink bag Mason had packed with the baby's belongings. He looked at Avery briefly, saw the genuine fear in her eyes, and felt something inside the wall he'd built soften just a little. "She's going to know both her fathers," he said finally, voice controlled but not cruel. "That's for her sake, not mine or yours. She's going to be loved and cared for. I promise that. But don't ask me for anything else." Avery nodded, tears falling silently as she handed the baby over to him. Logan placed his daughter in the car seat with meticulous care, checked the straps 3 times, and drove back to the farm with the child sleeping peacefully in the back seat. The following months established a strange but functional routine. Logan discovered it was entirely possible to love a child with overwhelming intensity while keeping impenetrable walls up with her mother. Exchanges happened in neutral parking lots, always quick and efficient. He and Avery exchanged messages only about the baby, vaccinations, sleep schedules, formula versus breastfeeding, motor development. Never about them. Never about the past. Never about feelings. Logan named his daughter Emma, after his grandmother, the same one who'd left him the farm as an inheritance. Avery agreed without resistance, seeming grateful he was at least participating in decisions. Emma grew quickly in her first few months, gaining weight, developing personality. She had Avery's smile, that smile that used to make Logan's heart race and now only reminded him of pain. But she also had his quiet stubbornness, that calm determination to get what she wanted without drama. On nights when he had custody, Logan rocked Emma on the farm porch, showing her the stars even though he knew eyes so new couldn't distinguish much beyond blurred shapes. He talked to her in a low voice, telling her about the grandfather she'd never know, about the mountains all around, about the animals who'd live in the barn one day. He never mentioned her mother beyond simple phrases like "your mom loves you very much" or "we'll see mom tomorrow." He refused to contaminate that innocent child with adult resentments. Avery was visibly trying to rebuild her life. Mason mentioned casually that she'd gotten a job at a smaller school, teaching private literature lessons. She was in therapy. Trying to find herself again, those were Mason's exact words. Logan listened to these updates with neutral politeness, never asking for more details, never offering opinions. What Avery did or how she was recovering wasn't his concern. His focus was Emma. One spring afternoon, 6 months after Emma's birth, Logan was planting wildflowers around the porch when Avery showed up half an hour early to pick up the baby. She got out of the car hesitantly, clearly nervous about breaking the established protocol of quick, efficient handoffs. Logan was on his knees in the dirt, hands dirty, Emma sleeping in her stroller in the shade beside him. "Sorry I'm early," Avery said softly. "I finished work sooner and thought I'd get a little extra time with her." Logan nodded, wiping his hands on his pants. "Emma's still asleep. You can wait if you want." Avery stood there, clearly wanting to say more. The silence stretched uncomfortably until she finally spoke. "The farm is beautiful, Logan. You did an incredible job. The apple trees are starting to bloom." He looked at the trees he'd planted 2 years ago, now covered in delicate white blossoms. "Yeah," he replied simply. "They'll bear fruit next year." Avery took another hesitant step. "I know you don't want to hear this, and I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I wake up every day hating the person I was. I destroyed the best thing I ever had out of pure selfishness and stupidity. And I'll spend the rest of my life dealing with it." Logan stopped planting and looked directly at her for the first time in months. "What do you want me to say, Avery? That it's okay?" "It's not. That I forgive you?" "I don't forgive you." "That we can be friends?" "We can't." Avery shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not asking for any of that. I just wanted you to know I recognize what I did. And I'm grateful, immensely grateful, that you're being the father you are to Emma. She's lucky to have you." Logan sighed deeply. "She deserves to have 2 present, functional parents. That's why I'm making this work. Not for you. Not for me. For her. Emma is innocent in all of this, and she's going to grow up knowing she's loved, even if her parents don't love each other anymore." Emma woke up at that moment, making those little baby noises when coming out of sleep. Logan stood, picked her up, and handed her to Avery. Their fingers brushed briefly during the transfer, and Logan felt a ghost of what he used to feel, but it was just that, a ghost. Avery held the baby against her chest, kissed her tiny forehead, and looked at Logan once more. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Logan didn't answer. He just watched as she placed Emma in her car seat and drove down the road. He stayed there on the porch long after the car disappeared, looking at the mountains and the trees he'd planted. The farm he'd built thinking of a future that would never come. But maybe, he thought, maybe that future just looked different than he'd planned. Emma would have 2 homes. She'd grow up knowing those mountains, helping in the orchard when she was older, maybe learning to care for animals at the clinic. The life Logan had imagined had died. But another was being born from the ashes. Forgiving Avery might never happen completely. The betrayal had left scars too deep, broken something fundamental in his ability to trust. But he could choose not to carry hate. He could choose to focus on the present instead of being stuck in the past. He could choose to be the best father possible to Emma, even if it meant civilly cooperating with the woman who'd shattered his heart. That night, alone in the kitchen of the farm he'd rebuilt with his own hands, Logan opened a beer and silently toasted his grandfather, whose inheritance made all of this possible. He toasted Emma, who slept peacefully miles away, completely unaware of the complexity of the adult world. He toasted the future version of himself who might, just might, learn not only to rebuild houses and fence pastures, but also to rebuild his ability to trust and love again. But that, he knew, would take far longer than any physical renovation. And unlike the apple trees that bloomed each spring, there was no guaranteed timeline for when flowers might grow again on emotionally burned soil. For now, there was Emma. There was the working co-parenting routine. There was the farm that still needed work and attention. There were animals at the clinic who depended on him. There was enough purpose to keep going, even if his heart still ached in unexpected moments. And maybe, Logan thought, looking out the window at the stars over the mountains, maybe that was enough for now. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting or fully forgiving, but simply learning to live with scars without letting them define every future move. Maybe it meant planting new seeds even in soil that seemed incapable of growing life again. Maybe it meant believing that springs would still come, even after the harshest winters. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.